Hello, a very warm good morning to all of you, and welcome to Unacademy, one stop destination for English medium civil services aspirants. Welcome to today's The Hindu newspaper analysis, where we discuss the Delhi edition of today's newspaper, discuss the articles which are relevant for your examination, and keep it strictly associated with the syllabus of civil services. Now, we discuss those articles in detail, both relevant for your prelims as well as for the mains exam. Now, before we jump into the article straight away, a couple of announcements. First of all, the Unacademy Civil Services Championship test, the scholarship test, is going to be conducted tomorrow at 11 a.m. and 5 p.m. And with this test, you can end up earning significant amount of scholarship and very lucrative prizes as well. So do appear for this test and evaluate yourself. Now, about the free classes. So, the schedule for the free classes for today are at 7 a.m. You have the NCRT fundamentals. At 12 p.m., you have the current affairs for the portion of sociology and current affairs aspect of it using MCQs being taken up by Astha ma'am. So, these are the portions of the special classes that shall be covered today. Now, looking at the topics that we are going to hold a discussion for. So today in total, we are going to discuss around 6 topics. Now, out of them, first of all, the three of them that we are going to discuss in slightly greater detail, that is India's suboptimal use of its labor power, where the labor force is actually getting utilized, which is the sector having maximum amount of labor force participation, and also the concept of demographic dividend. So that is something which has appeared in the editorial page, relevant for your GS paper 3 and also for your GS paper 1. Gender equality as a plank of sustainable development. Now, this talks about the energy sector, sustainable energy development, and how greater amount of gender participation can end up yielding good results. Again, in the editorial section, relevant for your GS paper 1. Then backed by Brahmos Navy's Minicoy base to keep a watch over the region of Arabian Sea. So this is a follow-up of the article which appeared a couple of days back about INS Jatayu, the naval base which has been established in the region of the Minicoy Island. Then few of the topics that we are going to discuss relevant for your prelims. The center tweaks PM solar free electricity scheme in terms of the subsidy that is going to be handed out. That has been slightly tweaked. Now, India four-nation EFTA bloc likely to sign the free trade agreement. So that has appeared in the business page, page 13, and inflation associated with what the famous thalinomics refers to, that measuring the inflation with the help of the thali prices, that is the entire meal price that you consume. So that has marked an increase in terms of the vegetarian thali that is there. So that is again in the business page, and that is again relevant for your prelims because it tells you about the aspect of measurement of inflation. Now, let us initiate the discussion with the first topic. The first topic of the day is India's suboptimal use of its labor power. Now, what is it about? So, this article starts with the argument that when we talk about the economic development in a region, in any particular area, we always take a look at the GDP numbers. We take a look at the GDP growth rate. And when we take a look at that, that gives us a very rosy picture. For example, the GDP growth rate, even in this quarter, has been quite significantly good. Now, that also does not give the full picture or the clearer picture about how the entire economy is functioning. Now, that is what the article is about. That despite the fact that the GDP numbers are growing at a very fast rate, when you actually dissect the employment numbers, that is where the story is something slightly different. Even though, if you take a look at the broader contours of the labor force participation, which is released by the periodic labor force survey and the labor force participation survey, so that tells us that the unemployment rates have gone down, the labor force participation has increased. For example, the labor force survey indicates that the overall workforce participation of the labor has increased quite substantially when you consider 2017, 18, to 2021-22, there has been almost a 4% increase in the labor force participation, which means what? There are more number of people who are actually working now. So here you will observe that significantly the labor force participation rate has increased from 52.35. It is in fact more than 4%. It is close to around 6% growth. So the labor force participation rate has increased. What is this labor force participation? You will hear this term time and time again in economic parlance. What is this labor force participation? So this basically talks about the fact that when we have a set of people, let's suppose in the working age group, who are either seeking employment or who want to carry out any particular kind of a job or who are involved in the job market. So that is the measure. So amongst all the people who are seeking employment at any particular time, what is the proportion which is actually employed? So that number, if it is 58.35%, that means, let's suppose out of 100 people who are seeking employment in the working age group, almost around 58 people are doing job somewhere or the other. So that basically means that the labor force participation has increased, the employment rate has increased. And even when you take a look at the brute unemployment numbers, the unemployment numbers have reduced by around 4% as well. So till now, everything looks good. Unemployment numbers are reducing, labor force participation is increasing. So what is the catch here? The catch is that if you then dissect that fact and look at the various areas of employment generated, and which is the area in employment generated where people are working more, where the proportion of this labor force is going significantly, you will find that this survey indicates that most of the people are working in the unpaid family jobs. To clarify it further, when we talk about the sectors and the areas of employment, you will find that there is three classification in terms of how this survey measures what kind of employment do the people have. So one is the regular waged or the salaried people, then the other is the casual work, and then you have the category which is self-employed. Now, even within that self-employed, you have various classifications. But overall, when you see the increase in the labor force participation, that increase has been attributed to an increase in the self-employed group. This self-employed group, that is the one which has marked an increase, right? When it comes to salary, regular salaried or waged labor, that is almost stagnant, right? So they are almost fixed. Okay, it is here that there has been a drastic increase. Now, this also is of three types. For example, own account workers. Let's suppose there are individuals who have opened up their own shops, they have opened up their own food carts, etc. So that is one of the portions of self-employed. Then unpaid family workers. Let's suppose you have a family kirana shop, a kind of a ration shop, any kind of a family owned shop, and you are working there. So you are not getting paid for the labor, but you are working there. So this is another sector. And then employers who employ outside labor. This is basically for the ones who start a particular kind of a business and who provide job opportunities for other people to join in. Now, the section of the employment data indicates to us that while the self-employed one is the most increased one, even in that, the significant amount of increment comes from the unpaid family workers. That is, people working in their own family shops and so on. This is the one which has indicated maximum amount of increment. But then, is that good? Is that bad? So it is not very good. You might have the argument in your mind that, okay, they are working in their family business or in their family shops. So that means they are going to earn significantly. But it is not always the case when you consider the entire country as a whole. So what you actually need is a good quality job to be created. And eventually, what is the end goal of having a job? To earn, to earn a livelihood, to be able to run, let's suppose, or to be able to give a meaningful and a prosperous life to your family, right? So that is the end goal of having a job. Now that means if we measure how the salary has changed, how the amount of income for the working people has changed over a period of time, that can give you a real amount of reflection in terms of how the employed people are doing in general. So here, by measuring the salaries, it was found out that overall, if you take the overall comparison and the overall compilation, there has been a kind of a 4% increase in salary taken on a whole. 4% increase. Now, this 4% increase might seem to be substantial, but understand, inflation continuously for the past 5 years has been hovering around the range of 5%. So, this salary increase is not even beating the inflation rate. If the inflation would have been continuously at 1%, 0.5%, and then the salary rise would be 4%, that means people are earning more. They have more money in their hand as compared to what they had, let's say 2 years back or 3 years back. But if your salary rise is less than the inflation rate, means you are spending more on the goods that you used to buy and you have much less amount of disposable income with you. So what does that lead? That leads to a stagnation in the amount of income levels. And that stagnation is never good for the long term growth and the development of the human capital per se. Now, even amongst the salary growth, I told you that the overall average is 4% increase in salary. But that 4% is not uniform. For example, for the regular waged and the salaried employees, that income rise has almost been stagnant. It has not even indicated a 4% increase. It is much lesser than that, almost similar. The maximum increase is by the casual work. Now, this is not a very high end job. This is not something which will earn you very much. Okay, so there also you will find that the casual workers only are earning more as compared to earlier because of the rise in the labor prices, etc. But nonetheless, they are not making quite significant. Now, what does that indicate? That in the economic sector overall, you have low skill jobs, which are on the rise. And low skill jobs mean what? Suboptimal utilization of the labor, of the human capital that you have. So they are not being used in the process or in the way, in the manner in which the entire economy gets pulled out of poverty. Because understand, India is not presently at the stage of the developed nations where even a 4% salary increase is more than enough. India presently is in a stage where we still need to pull many people out of the poverty line. Right? Many people still need to be pulled out of the below poverty conditions and poorer socio-economic conditions. Now, in that case, you cannot have this suboptimal labor payment and labor utilization. For that matter, even though when I say that the casual workers there, the salary increase has been more significant, on an average, they are earning close to around rupees 6,000. And that is not very high as compared to what is the BPL level or the poverty line. They are just doing slightly better than the poverty line. So that means we are not pulling enough amount of people out of poverty at the rate that we should. That brings us to the larger question. The larger question is that we can do fine with this amount of growth, with this amount of labor force participation. But this is the period in our country's growth story which has to be utilized. Why? Because of the factor that we refer to as the demographic dividend. What is this demographic dividend? Demography refers to the qualitative aspect of the population. That is the sex ratio, the age, etc. Right? So literacy rate, all of that. So demography refers to the qualitative property of population. Literacy rate, sex ratio, age group, etc. Now, in India, we have almost 60 to 65% of our population which is below the age of 35 years, which is a very significant resource. If you consider all the resources across the world, people talk about mineral resources here and there, agricultural resources. But the most important resource available is the human resource. So presently, if you have 65% of your population almost below 35 years, means what? That you will have a massive amount of influx of the population into the labor market who are going to do some or the other jobs. Now, when you have such massive amount of population entering into the job market, always the country grows forward. Now, US, when it expanded and became the superpower that we identified today to be, US also grew quite significantly when it hit this demographic dividend or this demographic parameter. China, if you consider, China also, when it had the youthful population, that is when it grew with a very significant pace in order to reach where it is. And more number of people were pulled out of poverty day after day. And that is why now it is in the upper middle class of the society. Now, similarly, India also needs to pull up its socks, and we as a country also need to utilize this. That is why it is dividend. Dividend means what? The benefit that you are earning, the benefit that you are getting owing to your demographic property. So our demographic property is that we have a youthful population, the youthful population which is going to enter into the workforce. So we should get the economic benefit out of it. Now, this youthful population is not going to last forever. The total fertility rates and the reproduction rates already have stagnated, which is good for the country in general, for the medical facilities, etc. Now, while this demographic dividend lasts, till then is the window for us. Now, this demographic dividend for us will be peaking, it is expected to peak in another 20 years. In another 20 years. And overall, from now, only up till 30 to 35 years is this dividend going to last. After that, what will happen? You don't have that many young people entering into the workforce, but you have a greater proportion of older people who are going to retire. And that is when you need pension services, etc. So, for these 30 to 35 years is when we can extract maximum, that is up till the year 2050, 2055. That is the time limit and the timeline that we have to show the maximum amount of expansion. After that, the growth always has stagnated as observed in various societies and various cultures. Now, how will you utilize this demographic dividend? So for that utilization, there needs to be various different tiers of work which needs to be put in. First of all, if you take a look at the uppermost tier, you need to create high-end jobs, high skill level jobs, isn't it? So that the people can earn so significantly, they can pull their entire family out of a particular income level and rise up the societal echelons. Secondly, in order to get that high-end jobs, what do you need to do? You need to basically work upon the aspect of skill development, upskilling. Provide that relevant skill which is relevant in the modern day job market. Now, how do you develop that skill? Increase the level of education and ensure quality education right at the grassroots. So that is how you can provide the high-end jobs starting with the grassroots, then working for the skill development and upskilling of the existing workforce, existing youth, and then you will yield the benefit in terms of the kind of jobs which get created. So that is a must. If that does not take place, If that does not happen for some reason or the other, then we are staring at another scenario altogether. Think about it for a brief moment. You have millions of people entering into the workforce or that working age group every year. Now, if you don't provide meaningful jobs to them, that means what? Either they will get involved in some low income jobs, menial jobs, barely able to make their ends meet, again being stuck in the same vicious cycle. If you're not earning enough, you are not able to provide the best quality of education, then low skilled individuals will come up, and again a low income job. So it is a kind of a vicious cycle that people can get stuck in. Secondly, people won't find employment. If you don't provide quality education and upskilling, you won't be fit for the entire world, the world which is rapidly advancing towards artificial intelligence and machine learning. There, low skill jobs do not have their place. So that is when people will be unemployed. If the unemployed proportion of the population goes higher up, always the world and the societies of the world have indicated that whenever the unemployment ratio goes unsustainably higher, that means social strife, significant amount of conflict, kind of uh, various different types of conflict, civil wars, etc. They have ensued, more amount of agitations, more amount of aggression within the society. So the harmony of the society, that gets damaged. Then people start feeling disillusioned with the entire story of the country's growth. And that is when many of the subvertive activities also take place. So, this demographic dividend, if not utilized, can end up leading to a kind of a demographic disaster. Demographic disaster. So, in order to prevent that flow, in order to prevent that coming of the demographic disaster or formation of a demographic disaster, employment and meaningful utilization of the labor force needs to happen, where the regular wage or the salaried, along with the employers who employ the outside labor, these proportions need to go substantially higher up as compared to the unpaid family workers. Okay. Now, here in this article, what is relevant to understand about the low income trap? Low income means what? I will write it down as well. So when we have low income, basically low income jobs, that means poor education and healthcare, poor education and healthcare. In terms of quality, now poor education and healthcare will mean what? Low skills, low skill set, and this leads to what? Again, low income jobs. So this vicious cycle you need to understand, which will not allow the country to take the next step, because our per capita income is still very low. We might think about the fact that in terms of the size of the economy, we have become larger than the UK. But for a brief moment, think about it. Our per capita income is close to around $2,000, roughly near about $500 here and there. And then in UK, the per capita income is close to around $40,000. So it is not only about the size of the economy, but what is the chunk of that size that the people are consuming. That is what we need to focus upon. And that needs a systemic change from the grassroots to the higher echelon. Now, gender equality as the plank of sustainable development. Now, this has again appeared in the editorial section. This is about how involvement of more women in the workforce is going to be beneficial to achieve sustainable development. And here, sustainable development basically is talked about in the form of sustainable energy transition from the fossil fuel burning and the dirtier forms of energy being used to cleaner forms of energy, renewables, right? For example, solar. So these kind of energy transition. Now, the article argues that a greater gender and a greater gender equality in terms of the participation in the energy sector holds a key in terms of achieving the sustainable development goals. I hope we are aware that sustainable development goals which were adopted in 2015, they have to be achieved by 2030, and they include a set of 17 SDGs. Now, if you provide that gender equality, so it will simultaneously help you achieve 2 to 3 of these goals. For example, SDG number 5, SDG 5, that is gender equality. SDG number 7, right? Affordable and clean energy. SDG number 13, climate action. Similarly, when you talk about decent work and economic growth, SDG number 8. So many different SDGs will be met by providing gender equality, particularly in the energy sector. So when we talk about the energy sector, energy is not only the kind of energy that you generate in the power plants. What you use as a cooking fuel, for example, that is also a form of energy that you are using at the domestic level, isn't it? Now, at that domestic level, you will find that increased amount of population, they are basically pursuing or they are still following burning of wood, coal, etc. for cooking purposes. Even though by the LPG scheme of the government, now gas cylinders are being provided, but still you have some chunk of population who is still using those fossil fuels. Now that creates the smoke, the fumes, and they are inhaled and they damage the health quite significantly and for a long run, right? So that leads to significant amount of pollution related deaths. That is because of the domestic consumption of that smoke. Now, this can change by adopting cleaner methods of energy. And study has indicated that amongst the early adopters of cleaner forms of energy, an overwhelming majority, almost two-thirds of the majority who have adopted cleaner forms of energy, they are women. Almost 71% of the people who have adopted or who are the early adopters of clean form of energy, they are basically women. So that tells you women are always more savvy towards that renewable energy. But then when we talk about the energy sector as a whole, as a block, as a large, there also the women labor force participation is very low. As per the International Energy Agency, in our country, the women labor force participation in the energy sector is a meager 10%. And there also, in that low 10% number, most of the women are basically employed at low income jobs, low end jobs, labor force, etc. They do not get that meaningful employment because of the factors that we discussed in complete yesterday also, because of the aspect of double burden at house also and at workplace also. So there has to be a kind of a flexibility in work timing so that career progression also does not happen at the required pace, right? So that is where we need to increase that women labor force participation by providing the skill set, the skill level, changed expectation out of women. Now, there are various different areas which are not very well connected in terms of infrastructure. Those are the regions where still you will find increased number of population using the fossil fuels for cooking purposes and getting damaged and impacted. The health gets damaged. Now, here the example has been given of the solar mamas. The solar mamas, basically, they are the ones who are inculcating the culture of utilizing solar cookers, solar heaters, etc. It is a renewable form of energy, clean form of energy without pollution, has got a good efficiency as well. Now, these solar mamas, basically the name in itself suggests you that they belong from the female gender. Now these solar mamas, they have increased the amount of renewable energy utility and utilization, particularly in the rural areas and the not so good or not so well connected region in terms of infrastructure. So more promotion of this also needs to take place. A better practice needs to be people need to be made aware of the good practices about how to alleviate themselves from the damage that you have by burning of fossil fuel. So overall, if we end up achieving that, that is when we will be able to look at a better and a sustainable world with a sustainable energy utilization. Okay, so that is what this article is. It is mostly a follow up of the articles regarding women employment and women labor force participation that we looked at yesterday. So that is a kind of a follow up. All the logic and the reasons that we followed about that why women don't find significant or meaningful amount of employment, that also fits the bill in this case. Okay, now then coming to the third article, that is backed by Brahmos, Navy's Minicoy base to keep watch over the region of Arabian Sea. Now, the Minicoy base, which is named as INS Jatayu, INS Jatayu has got a significant amount of strategic importance. And overall, when we talk about the busy sea lanes of communication, most of those busy sea lanes of communication, they end up passing through the 9-degree channel in the region of the Arabian Sea. Now, 9-degree channel is the one which passes between the Minicoy Islands and the other group of Lakshadweep Islands. Now, the nearest island from Minicoy is the Suheli Reef, which is almost 200 kilometers away. This is the 9-degree channel. It is named as 9-degree channel because of the 9-degree north latitude which passes through it. Okay. Now, the Navy has also got a base at Kavarati. But then INS Jatayu is supposed to be much better and much better equipped. You have various different jetties which have been established, various different missile installations like Brahmos, and an extended version of Brahmos, an improved version of Brahmos, which can have a range of close to around 450 kilometers. 450 kilometers. So that Brahmos supersonic missile with a range of 450 kilometers will add a significant punch into the Navy's strike ability. You also have the deployment of radars which are being done so as to monitor the underwater activities, nefarious activities that the Chinese Navy is basically involved in. And you would have known this that for the past few years, the Chinese research vessels are moving across the entire region of around Bay of Bengal, around the Indian Ocean, around the region of Arabian Sea. And these are research vessels, right? So for the world, they are almost innocuous. They are not damaging. But if you understand why the research vessels are looking forward in the area of, or why they are moving in the region of Bay of Bengal, Arabian Sea, and Indian Ocean, the reason is very simple. They want to get and they are getting the exact detail of the seabed and the various different ridge formations underwater and the property, what is known as the bathymetric data. Bathymetric data basically tells you about the underwater conditions, right? The depth parameter, etc. So why is that helpful for them? This is helpful if you have to use your submarines. For submarine operation, you need a detailed data map for any water body so that the submarines can operate in a smooth manner. They will be able to surface only when they are required to, not because they have hit a kind of a land barrier there. So that is why all the research vessels, they are being deployed there. Recently, you had the vessel, Chinese vessel docked in Maldives also, carrying out that research purpose, so to say. Now, this is where Indian Navy is taking a stock of it. And Indian Navy is coming up with a response for setting up of a large military base in Minicoy. Now, understand that the islands that India has, one in the region of the Bay of Bengal, Andaman Sea, another in the region of Arabian Sea, both of them, they add a significant strategic heft, a kind of a depth in our geopolitical stance. Islands, they serve as the unsinkable aircraft carriers. while the world spends, and even we spend thousands of crores, 40,000, 50,000 crores, 60,000 crores on building an aircraft carrier which can carry certain aircrafts. Understand that aircraft carrier is destroyed very easily by the strike of a missile. So your enemy can immediately sink your 50, 60,000 crore worth of investment. Everything can go down the drain. That is where the islands, they are termed as the unsinkable aircraft carriers. You cannot sink the islands regardless of the missile strikes, can you? And this is where you can have a permanent deployment. That is the advantage. Along with that, because these are areas of very busy sea lane and sea traffic, maintenance of security forces in these areas can ensure freedom of navigation, can ensure the freedom from, let's suppose, intervention by pirates and so on. So that is also beneficial, right? Thirdly, if you think about it, these waters are very rich in the corals and subsequently, because of the coral population, also very rich in the fisheries and mineral resources. That can also give us an economic advantage. And the development and maintenance of the islands helps you carry your frontier border much far away from where the mainland territory exists. The mainland territory, let's suppose, exists here. These islands help you increase your strategic arm. And that is why it has been termed that, because the 21st century is slated to be the century of the Indian Ocean, where Indian Ocean is going to rise in prominence because of the trade and the defense which is being developed in this area. Development of these islands, maintenance of the naval bases in the islands is going to be of help. Now, the Navy already has got a significantly developed naval base in the Andaman Nicobar group of islands with the name of INS Baz. INS Baz on the side of the Andaman Nicobar and INS Jatayu now on the side of Lakshadweep. Both of them together will further our strategic goals and our geopolitical heft in the region. Okay. Now, that is what this article is about. What kind of question can be framed from this? We'll talk about it. But UPSC has asked this question previously, multiple times, in optional portion of geography, in GS portion, GS paper 1 also, and also in the portion of geography optional. That is, why is it, or mention the geopolitical advantages of the Indian islands. Why is it relevant to develop the islands for the development of India? In the essay paper, UPSC had asked a question previously about the geopolitical advantages of the location of India on top of the Indian Ocean. So it is in these areas where you can always talk about the requirement of these islands and the requirement of development. Because understand, when we talk about the Andaman Nicobar Islands, they lie very close to the choke point, that is the Malacca Strait, through which all the Chinese trade passes through. And believe it or not, China and Pakistan are the countries that we are always wary of. We are not worried about whether Australia will damage us or whether Canada can damage us. Obviously not. We are worried about China and Pakistan. So that is where these islands can be of significant help. Now moving on to the topics relevant for your prelims. Center tweaks PM solar free electricity scheme. So Muft Bijli Yojana, the scheme that the center had announced. It had earlier announced that basically under this scheme, what is being promoted is the installation of rooftop solar. This free electricity scheme is not the fact that you use the electricity and you will not be charged. It is about installation of rooftop solar. Rooftop solar can provide a long-term solution for energy security across the country. Because when we talk about being connected to the grid and the power generated in our country, majority of the power which is generated by the fossil fuels. And even in the fossil fuels, majority of that power is generated by burning of coal, the thermal power plants. That causes not only pollution, but also due to supply shocks in the coal sector, you have lower efficiency sometimes and also energy scarcity when we are transitioning. And even presently, we are moving towards the summer season. Summer season basically is frequented by power cuts, power outages across the country, right? Because of energy scarcity. If you have a rooftop solar, that household can become self-sufficient in terms of energy generated. Now the scheme is that free electricity. It was touted and it was reported in the media a few days back that this scheme is about that install the rooftop solar for free, and that is the free electricity that you are getting provided. But that is where the center has come out and the secretary has basically clarified that we are going to provide some amount of subsidy for the installation of the solar panels. And that subsidy will vary. It is not a complete subsidy or a comprehensive subsidy. It is basically subsidy to the tune of a small proportion or a significant proportion of what your expenses are going to be. And it is not going to be a complete free electricity which is going to be provided. The amount of money that you will save for installation. Let's suppose for installation, you are spending rupees X. So where is the free electricity if I am spending rupees X for the installation of solar panel? The argument that the center has put forward is the fact that right now you are spending X. That X is much lower than the market value of installing solar panels because we are providing that subsidy. But then over the years, you will go for significant amount of savings of your electricity bills. So these savings will offset the amount of money that you have invested. And in the time period of 3 to 5 to 7 years, that will turn out to be a kind of a free electricity that will be available to you. It is this scheme also talks about the fact that when you have these rooftop solars, let's suppose generating more amount of electricity as compared to what your utility levels are, the excess amount of energy shall be sent back to the grid. And with the help of the meters installed, you can always end up measuring what is the amount of energy being sent back to the grid. And that can earn you some amount of income as well. So that is how the electricity generators are being decentralized now. This is going to be of tremendous help in the case of the rural areas, hilly areas, not very well connected by infrastructure. And in the long run, the cleaner energy targets for country will also be met, and simultaneously energy security will. Now here, the rooftop solar program by the government has been initiated for almost a decade now. The success has been partial. It has not been quite significant. If you would have taken a look at your own surroundings, you would have found that nowadays you will have increased number of households having those solar panels, which was not the case, let's suppose, a couple of decades back. Now, that there still, when the rooftop solar program was initiated or launched almost a decade back, as an individual, if I wanted to install rooftop solar, I had to run from pillar to post, submit applications here and there, and then I would be granted that. But now the entire scheme is to be made online, so that sitting at home you can apply online and you can get that money or get that installation done. Okay. So what this free scheme is about, free electricity, it is not going to waive off your electricity bill. It is basically going to provide you subsidy for the installation of the solar. And then that installation of the solar will eventually, because you are not connected to the or you are not basically taking electricity from the government, you are basically generating electricity on your own. So there will be savings in your electricity cost, and those savings will end up compensating the expense, thereby earning you free electricity in the long run and ability to generate income at the end of it. Okay. Now, India four nation EFTA bloc likely to ink free trade agreement on 10th of March, that is tomorrow. So basically, the four nation EFTA bloc, what are those four nations? So this EFTA basically is European Free Trade Association, and it involves four of the countries. That is, you have Norway, Finland, Liechtenstein, and Switzerland. These are the four countries. Okay, Norway, Finland, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. These countries are the ones who have a significant amount of value addition and a significant amount of well-being, high per capita income, high-end manufacturing sector, which is present in these. So that is why this free trade agreement is going to be beneficial. It is different from the previously signed free trade agreements in the way that the previous free trade agreements, they don't talk about necessarily in the agreement part that how much money is being brought in or how much money will come in as a result of this agreement or how many jobs are being generated. In this case, there has been a kind of a written agreement that significantly close to around million jobs will be generated, right? And significant chunk of money close to around investments, close to around $100 billion that is going to come in, right? So million jobs, $100 billion, that is what India is set to benefit from in the long run. Now, this is what is also referred to as the India European, or rather European FTA. Okay, India European FTA, Trade and Economic Partnership and Economic Partnership Agreement, what is known as TEPA. So this is being termed as TEPA. So here UPSC is known to ask these questions frequently, that India has arrived at a trade and economic partnership agreement with which bloc, with which country, right? So this TEPA is with which country, right? All the free trade agreements are named differently. So this is with the European FTA bloc, four countries, that is Finland, Norway, Switzerland, and Liechtenstein. Okay. Now, after this, we come to the last article of the day, and that is food plate costs show that the vegetarian thali prices rose 7% in February. Now, this is a part of what our ex-governor of RBI, that is Raghuram Rajan, had famously proposed as the thalinomics, which was also then brought out by the economic survey. The economic survey also talked about the thalinomics. So what is that? That is basically, we all hear about the inflation, that these prices have been inflated, the headline inflation numbers are this much, CPI is this much, etc., etc. But the real impact on our lives, your life, my life, that real impact, how is it realized? How do we measure that? So that is where a kind of a measuring parameter was done. That is basically the case of measuring the price of a thali, a meal, and whether that price has increased or decreased. Now, the survey has indicated that for the vegetarian thali, the prices have increased year on year, even though there is a catch there. As compared to January, February has indicated a tempering down of prices, a reduction in the prices. But as compared to last year, there has been an increase in the prices only for the vegetarian. For the non-vegetarian meal or the non-vegetarian thali, there has been a price drop. That is largely because of cases such as bird flu cases in the region of Andhra Pradesh. That is why the cost of a broiler has reduced quite significantly in comparison. But for the vegetarian, that has increased. Now, why that has happened? Because of the rise in price for onions and potatoes, for example. Even for the grains, that is rice and wheat, there has been an increase in inflation, but it is slightly moderate. It is the vegetable prices which have taken up this bill. Now, what does that tell you? How is it relevant for your examination? That tells you that one needs to, if we want to bring the inflation numbers in control, the best possible way is to bring the food prices under control. Fruits and vegetables, their prices need to be brought under control. How do you bring that under control? By ensuring agricultural reforms, by ensuring greater amount of value addition, by ensuring a better and mass level of production, an ensured and reliable supply, a kind of a well ensured and a significant proofed up supply chain mechanism, logistic mechanism for transportation, storage, and distribution of those vegetables. That is where reform is needed in the sector. So that is basically, until and unless we don't develop enough cold storages, we don't develop the good connectivity from farm to market, we are going to juggle with this inflation numbers one way or the other. Now, then we move to the practice questions. So discuss the geostrategic importance of the Indian islands going ahead into the 21st century. So in this case, in the introduction, simply mention about the islands. So India has got a significant group of islands, both in the Arabian Sea and Bay of Bengal, and that adds a value to our strategic strength. Now, after that, talk about that how 21st century is being touted as the century of the Indian Ocean. It is famously said by the one of the greatest strategic thinkers of our time, that is Alfred Mahan, had stated that the one who controls the oceans controls the world. And also, you can talk about the famous quotation which says that the 19th century belonged to the Atlantic. That is when the Atlantic powers grew. The 20th century belonged to the Pacific. The Pacific powers grew. The 21st century belongs to the Indian Ocean. And India sitting atop the Indian Ocean is said to gain most significantly by this. And that is where India has an advantage. And then talk about majority of the trade, almost 90% of trade by volume in the region moves through the ships and the seas, and the 9-degree channel being one of the busiest routes. That is where development of INS Jatayu can be of a significant help. Now also talk about the development of INS Baz in the region of Andaman Nicobar, because that sea traffic then moves through the busy Malacca Strait. So that increases our ability to monitor the commercial traffic, maintain free navigation, and Indian Navy's overarching security plan to be the net security provider in the Indian Ocean from Gulf of Aden in the west to the Strait of Malacca in the east shall be fulfilled by the development of these islands. This will help us utilize the resources also in a better way, react to and provide significant amount of humanitarian and disaster rescue operations in the entire Indian Ocean region as well. Like that you mention about, and in the later part of the answer in the body also talk about the while this development bodes well for the Indian strategic forces and geostrategic stance, challenges remain with the help in the form of the Chinese aggression in the area, increased Chinese incursions in the area. They have basically posed a challenge, and that is where the further development and channelization of development is required. Eventually, in the conclusion, you can very briefly write, if India needs to look at itself and develop itself as a superpower of the world, we cannot do by we cannot achieve that by ignoring the waters. And India's position atop the Indian Ocean warrants the development of these islands to achieve that goal. Okay. Now, bring out the importance of gender equity in order to achieve sustainable development. Here you talk about the SDG 5, SDG 7, SDG 13. Mention them, what they are about. Talk about gender equality in terms of labor force participation, in terms of adoption of clean cooking energy, in terms of the low level of work employment in the energy sector, and talk about the fact that how you have innovative measures like the solar mamas in the remote areas, they can always alleviate and improve the socio-economic condition. Okay, so this is how you can write the answers. Do write the answers, practice it yourself within the stipulated time limit, and you will improve the much needed skill for the main exam. So that is what brings me to the end of this discussion. I hope the session has been helpful, added some value to your existing knowledge set. If you have liked the video, if you have liked the content, please do comment and click on the like, share, and the subscribe button. Till we meet again, take care of yourself. Thank you. Goodbye.